I'm not intentionally trying to start a whirlwind here. I'm not trying to create chaos. However, I do think that this is a topic that is very glossed over.
Like your TV show, what's it called?
Dark Times.
I got a TV show, did you see mine? It's called I'm a Jackass.
I'm thinking of who these cameras are being marketed toward. Now, what I have in my hands here is in fact an FX30. Yes, I did sell my A7S III, and I kind of downgraded to the FX30. However, I am going to be doing a video very shortly after this one of all the reasons why I believe the FX30 is in fact an upgrade over the A7S III. But that's not what today's video is about. Now that I've been shooting with this for about a week now, I do want to address some issues here. Because this one is basically a carbon copy of the FX3 with just a half-size sensor, you know, these two cameras, the FX3 and the FX30, do go hand in hand with these issues. So a lot of my beef comes from the simple fact that not only did Sony write cinema line on the top of both of these cameras, the FX30 and the FX3, but they're also marketing them as cinema cameras. And this camera specifically, the FX30, they are marketing as an entry-level cinema camera, and everyone is talking about it as an entry-level cinema camera. However, you have to keep in mind, someone like me, about 6 or 7 years ago, well, the entry-level cinema camera that I was using was the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. I'm talking about the OG, the one with the Super 16 size sensor, and then from there I graduated onto the Pocket 4K and then onto the Red Komodo. You guys all know the story, the ones I've been following along this whole time. So when I'm looking at those cameras as entry-level cinema cameras, and then I get this little FX30 in my hands, I'm sitting here thinking, this FX30 is missing 4 main key ingredients that I feel definitely make something a cinema camera. In my opinion, both the FX30 and the FX3 are just glorified video cameras. And I'm looking online and I'm seeing a bunch of people say, oh man, I sold my Blackmagic Pocket camera for an FX30. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? I don't know if that was quite the right move. Now, obviously, I don't know what these people need in terms of features, because obviously the FX30 and the FX3 are jam-packed with features. Most of them are video-based features, right? Things that I think about that the way that I use a Sony camera for documentary shooting, run-and-gun shooting, for projects that don't exactly have the budget for, you know, the Red Komodo or a small skeleton crew, right? Like I've always said, I've reserved my Komodo for my narrative shoots, and I've reserved the Sony cameras for more solo shooter stuff, more like corporate video stuff, right? So that's the way I approach these cameras, strictly as tools. So keep that in mind when I'm sharing this stuff with you. And also keep in mind, a lot of this just comes down to the simple fact that of the way that Sony is marketing these cameras, right? I mean, if you're going to write cinema line on the top of the camera, I would expect it to have some very basic cinema features. The first one is something that everyone has raved about. Say it with me now, no shutter angle. This is a big problem, specifically with the Sony cameras, because it ties in perfectly with my next issue with all Sony cameras, is the overcrank mode. Overcrank, undercrank, more commonly known as the S and Q mode on Sony cameras, right? Slow and quick mode. Now, why would those two problems coincide with each other? So let's just back up here a bit. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but also keep in mind that I do have to address all issues, thinking about everyone at all levels that are watching this channel, right? So I apologize for anything that starts sounding elementary to you if you're such a high-level DP, but just bear with me here, right? Just keep in mind, I gotta speak to a very general, broad audience. So let's just back up here and talk about the differences between shutter speed versus shutter angle and why that is a problem for someone like me who's been primarily shooting on real entry-level cinema cameras for the past 6 or 7 years. What is the primary differences here? Now, shutter speed, in my opinion, is a tool that photographers lean on, right? It's a tool, it's part of their exposure triangle. Whereas in my experience and in my opinion, in the cinematography world, shutter angle is more leaned on, more for creative artistic purposes versus exposure purposes, right? Now, obviously a shutter is a shutter, right? So we all know that the more you open the shutter, the more light is let in, and the more you close down the shutter, the less light is let in, right? So you're still gonna have those basic features. However, I'm never on a set thinking about, hey, let's change the shutter angle because we don't have enough light on this scene, right? No cinematographers doing that. Only photographers are doing that. And maybe some very kind of people that are right in the middle, they've been spending a lot of years as a photographer, now they're just getting into videography, right? These people may still lean on shutter speed for exposure. Let me break this down for you in cinematography terms, okay? Let's think about movies like Saving Private Ryan, where a good majority of that film, specifically the battle scenes, is all shot at a 45-degree shutter angle. Now, obviously what's happening here, less light is hitting the sensor. That's basic concepts, right? But we know that they chose that for the specific motion blur that it would add, this kind of choppy, jittery effect. Now, on the flip side of that, you take someone like Wong Kar-wai, okay? He's doing what they call step printing, right? He's shooting in film, right? It gives him more flexibility to do this, but he is jacking that shutter angle up to like 240, 250, if not higher. Now he's letting more light on the sensor, obviously very basic, but what's really going on, why he's really doing that, is to get this nice, slow, blurry motion blur, getting a very ethereal effect, a very dreamlike effect, right? That's how cinematographers lean on shutter, right? So it's not so much about exposure when it comes to cinematography. And this is why I really have a problem with this. I'm used to the shutter angle just automatically adapting to whatever my recording frame rate is. So now let's do a full circle and tie this into why this is an issue with the S&Q mode, specifically on Sony cameras, because S&Q is their thing. First of all, this is a big problem with me because of the way Sony is marketing the FX30 and the FX3 cameras specifically. So what is Sony doing? They're trying to upsell you on these top handles that have these really nice professional XLR inputs, right? So they basically here, Sony is thinking about professional audio, and they want you, us, the consumers, to think about professional audio as well. The problem I have with this is, how are most of us about 50% of the time, if not more? Let's be real here. I'm talking about you wedding guys out there, right? How often are you guys popping into that S&Q mode to get some sexy B-roll, right? Well, most of the wedding guys, I know corporate guys, a lot of guys are editing their own videos, are doing the whole package. So I know a lot of those guys are thinking about audio as well, right? The problem is, as soon as you pop into S&Q mode on any Sony camera, they kill the audio track. All right, so now Sony has got us to spend an extra $400 or $500 on a top handle and then another $5,000 to $1,000 on the XLR microphone that you're carrying. The problem is 50% of the time, if not more, that is just a paperweight on your top handle because Sony literally kills the audio signal. So what that does for someone like me who may think about the audio, I want that audio for post, that is going to force me to change my actual recording frame rate, okay? So now I'm going to go into the camera, I'm going to change it from 24 frames to a true 60 frames per second. But here's the problem, and this is how it ties in with shutter angle, right? If I'm used to working on real cinema cameras that have a shutter angle, I can instantly change my recording frame rate and just go shooting. The problem is, this doesn't have a shutter angle. So that shutter speed doesn't adapt to my new recording frame rate like a shutter angle is. For instance, it doesn't matter what shutter angle you're on, 180, 240, 250, 360, 45, 90, it wouldn't matter what shutter angle you're on, it's always going to adapt to your recording frame rate. So this is the stuff I'm talking about where there's a slight disconnect here, but I think it's a huge disconnect to upsell us on an XLR mic that we can't really use anytime we want to take advantage of your really cool S&Q option. Okay, that was like a double hitter right there because don't even get me started, something like the Red Komodo. Now granted, we all know that the Red Komodo is a cinema camera, GoPro, whatever you want to call it, right? But at the end of the day, it is an entry-level cinema camera. A lot of people laugh at me because I use it as an A-cam on a lot of my feature films and short film projects that I do. I really don't care. I know what the camera's capable of. I love that camera. It is my narrative beast camera. And I know some people saw where I was tempted to trade it for a C70. I backed out of that. We'll do a video on that in the future. Maybe we'll do a live stream about why I didn't go through with trading my Komodo for a C70. That's not what today's video is about. But yes, I did still keep my Red Komodo. Why I brought it up is because I can jump into overcrank on the Red Komodo, basically S&Q, Komodo, right? And I will still get that audio track. The original Komodo is notoriously known for its horrible preamps, as it should be. I don't expect any real cinema camera, especially a Red, to have amazing preamps like some ENG camera would, right? Like an FX6, for example. But at least that camera still gives you a scratch track. You're not gonna get that with this camera where you just spend all these extra hundreds of dollars for these XLR inputs that are quite honestly useless anytime you do S&Q. Now, the next two things also kind of tie into each other, and this is where I'm definitely gonna piss off a lot of Sony fanboys. And keep in mind, that's not what I'm intentionally trying to do. I'm not trying to start some kind of war. But if you have been subscribed to this channel, however, I know my analytics, 80% of you watching this are not subscribed to the channel, so welcome. And I do get a little crazy and intense, and I'm a very passionate person, and as you can tell, I'm a quick talker, so maybe you don't have to jump to that 1.5 times speed, right? You might even have to slow it down. Cine EI is a feature that we have in these little cameras, a way to monitor our exposure index, right? And so many people have done YouTube videos on this now, okay? And I get it, right? It's this really cool feature. However, I would argue that Cine EI is pointless in these specific cameras, both the FX30 and the FX3. Why? Because these cameras do not have any good exposure monitoring tools inside of them, okay? Now, we're not gonna get into the discussion about external monitors. I'm not concerned with what this camera can do with a monitor attached to it, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about what the camera can do all on its own straight out of the box compared to other cameras like Red or Blackmagic, other entry-level cinema cameras, right? This is what we're getting into here. Because if we get into the argument of, oh, if you put an Atomos monitor on there, now it opens up for all, fine. But what is cinema about that? The fact that, oh, when I attach something to this little flimsy HDMI cable, now I have a cinema camera because I spent an extra $800 to $1,000 for a monitor that makes it, basically like we uncracked it to be a cinema camera. No. I'm not playing that game. I'm talking specifically what the camera is capable of on its own, okay? So the fact that we don't have any real exposure monitoring tools available to us. What does Sony give us to monitor our Cine EI, our exposure index? What do they give us? Zebras and histogram. Well, what are those? Those are notoriously archaic in the photography world. Histograms, in my opinion, are completely useless. Okay, I'm gonna tell you why zebras aren't so hot either. I may be stepping on some toes here, but I feel like Cine EI is a way for Sony to make us feel like we're shooting on RAW. Now again, I realize you can get ProRes RAW out of this thing. I'll have a rant about that shortly, right? Again, we're not talking about what you can hack this camera with. I'm talking about what it is capable of all on its own, okay? That's a key thing to remember in this video. Please do that, okay? What this camera can do on its own. It can't do RAW on its own, okay? Therefore, why I feel like this Cine EI thing is Sony's way of making us feel like we're shooting on RAW, because of someone like me that's been shooting on other entry-level real cinema cameras for the past 6 or 7 years. Someone like me, I use ISO not for exposure. Again, I've made 2 videos about this now, and I'll leave links to them down in the description below if you are brand new here and you never saw those. Now, this is a simple old school practice, technique, whatever you want to call it, that I adopted directly from the American Society of Cinematographers, okay? For cinematographers, ISO is not a part of our exposure triangle. It's just not. We don't use ISO to dial in exposure. And why? Because we're shooting RAW. We use ISO, again, much like shutter angle, for creative reason, artistic choices. A key important thing here that I tell all my Patreon members, I know what my ISO is going to be before I even get to the location, before I even get to set. I've already decided on what my ISO is going to be. And you say, Justin, how do you do that? Well, it's simple. Everything in the universe can only be one of 4 things. I don't care what you're shooting. I don't care if it's a commercial, narrative film, short film, feature film, a wedding, a broadcast, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Everything in the universe can only be one of 4 things. Is it a day interior? Is it a day exterior? Is it a night interior or is it a night exterior? That's all it can be, folks. Whatever the answer is to that question, that will inform me what ISO I will be putting my camera at. So we already dialed it in pre-production, and you guys know I test the hell out of my cameras in pre-production with filters and lenses and all that stuff. So when I show up on the day, ISO is already locked in. We're not changing ISO, okay? Flip to a video camera. If we had proper exposure tools, then the Cine EI thing would be beneficial to me. We have zebras? Zebras? Really? First of all, zebras is super archaic, reads off of the IRE values. I'm not into that. But the problem I have with zebras is, let's say you wanted to put your zebras at skin tones. Because what is the whole point of our Cine EI, our exposure index? What is the whole point? Well, the way I understand it is so we can monitor those skin tones, so we can monitor the highlights, so we can monitor the shadows. But if we don't have good exposure tools to monitor that stuff, what the hell is the point of Cine EI, right? So they give us zebras. That's all you have, because histograms isn't going to do shit for you, right? It's just not. So we're left with zebras. So you go, okay, let me set my zebras to like 48, 51%, right? Let's say that's our skin tone zebras. Just who cares? Let's just say that's the number, right? The problem is, okay, because it's IRE, it's just ones and zeros once the light hits your sensor. That's all IRE is, okay? It's voltage, okay? So what you're seeing now, you get 41 or whatever the number is on your face, and then also, wherever on the screen that IRE voltage is reading, you're gonna have zebras there too, all right? It's gonna get very convoluted and confusing, especially on a little screen. Again, I know you have all these cool monitors nowadays, but we're not talking about that, are we? Right? Because every Blackmagic camera has some sort of exposure tool way beyond just a histogram, right? And also the Red Komodo, tons of features in the Red Komodo, right? So this is what I mean, right? Especially with this tool, I wouldn't really have a problem with that, but they give us this feature of Cine EI that everyone is losing their minds about and just raving about it. Oh, we have to use it. I'm sitting there going, for why? For what? The camera is not raw. I know if I want the most dynamic range out of this camera, I'm gonna put it at ISO 800. And if I'm in a low light situation, or if I'm in a situation where I don't have enough lights because of the budget or the crew or whatever, well then I'm gonna, with this camera specifically, the FX30, then I'll jump to that second native ISO of 2500. That's all, you're stuck at that. And that's really all CineAI is doing. It's basically sticking you at those ISOs. Why are we playing mind games here? We don't have a way to properly monitor the exposure. Now, what I think we could have is, why not have a waveform for the sake of God, right? Like a waveform would be the simplest, most easiest thing. It's something they could easily do in a firmware update. Hell, they just put out an app just recently where now they have waveform and false color in an app. But I'm not gonna pull out my phone and wait for it to connect to the app a minute or however long it takes, just so I can check my skin tones with your CineAI feature, right? So a lot of this stuff I have some issues with. And a lot of it is because this is what happens in our culture, right? Like everybody praises these tools as if this company cares about you. I hate to burst your guys' bubble, but Sony doesn't care about you unless your name is Philip Bloom or Gerald Undone or one of those yahoos, right? Let's be real here, okay? They don't care about me and they certainly don't care about you, right? Because Sony is a huge conglomerate business. Let's not forget, before they were making cameras, they were making Blu-ray players and televisions and VCRs, right? The only reason Sony is in our industry at all is because they gobbled up Minolta when Minolta was dwindling down in the 90s. I mean, hell, this logo right here, this Alpha logo that they have ran with for years, they stole this from Minolta. Minolta invented the Alpha logo, and why? Because they invented autofocus. That's when the Alpha logo came about. If it wasn't for Minolta, we would have never had autofocus, not so quick. If it wasn't for Minolta, we wouldn't have had auto exposure, not so quick, right? So this company inherited all that heritage. They're not a true legacy in our community the way that someone like Leica is, or even, for instance, I know a lot of people give hate to Red, but Red are, they built from the ground up, right? Now, granted, I know the owner was originally an Oakley's guy, and then he started making the cameras, right? So it may have been a little bit of an ego trip, but they established their position very quickly. Now, I'm not saying Sony hasn't either. They've made some really incredible cameras, the Sony Venice, and yada, yada, right? I get that. But just remember, at the end of the day, they are a huge corporation. Gigantic corporation, right? So I don't understand why these cults are created around camera brands, right? I just do not understand that at all. Maybe you guys can explain that to me in the comments, right? A guy like me, a working man from the ground up, I'm grungy, I'm blue collar, right? You know, I don't get involved in all that. I figure out the tool, and then I figure out the tool that works for me for the specific job. What I'm saying here is, can we get waveform or false color in the camera and make CineAI actually useful? Or better yet, could we get the EL Zone system? Okay, now a full disclaimer here, I am an affiliate of Small HD and I have done a full demonstration of how to use the EL Zone, both in a high key and in a kind of a low key situation. Again, if you're new here, I'll have a link to that video down in the description below, and I will say that Small HD reached out to me and they did say their engineers were enjoying that video, so I guess I did something right for once, right? But again, the EL Zone is a game changer. And let me explain to you and hopefully maybe someone that's involved with Sony, let's be real, no one's gonna watch this video, but let me explain to you why EL Zone is a game changer for this camera and maybe get you to use it on a monitor, but it would be better if it was in the camera, right? But on a monitor such as something like Small HD, where you can actually take advantage of this CineAI feature, right? Because what EL Zone does is it literally turns any camera sensor into a calibrated light meter. Here's the difference between EL Zone and false color, because people think they're very synonymous and they're not. They're very, very different, and I talk about all those differences in the video that I've linked down below. Again, false color is ones and zeros. It's voltage. EL Zone is not working off of voltage. EL Zone, the way it works, you are literally mapping the EL Zone system to match exactly what your sensor is capturing. For instance, you would map it to say, okay, I'm shooting S-Log3, S-Gamut 3 Cine. You literally have to put that, you have to feed the color pipeline to the system. That's how it literally can basically have a marriage with your sensor, and now it can show you the actual stops of light. You could instantly look down at the screen and go, oh, okay, my cheek is half a stop over. Oh, this cheek is half a stop under. Or, oh, the sky back there is 2 stops over. Or that shadow is 4 stops under. That's how concise it is. You would know everything by a stop value. Now, in the world of cinematography, that's something I'm hip to. Now, granted, I've always used light meters. People used to laugh at me by using light meters, but now that's something my brain can connect to, because now we're talking about the reality of the situation. We're talking about stops of light. Don't talk to me about voltage. I don't care about IRE. I want to know stops of light. There's nothing more smarter in my opinion, than this EL Zone system. Now, wouldn't you want something like that combined with this Cine EI feature? Those 4 things are it's a little upsetting to me, right? No shutter angle, that's pretty basic, dude. No real exposure tools. Again, I feel like that's something basic. We're in 2023 here. Why do we have the 2 crappiest exposure tools known to man? I know the ability not able to shoot internal RAW, that's pretty harsh of me. I get it, but come on, guys. The little Sigma FP, that was my favorite thing about that little camera. Internal 12-bit RAW. It's like, dude, it's a no-brainer, right? Again, any Blackmagic camera, internal RAW from the beginning, right? And of course, we all know R3D RAW, right? So this is what I mean. It's like, is it though? Is it a cinema camera? You know, I have these issues with it. Maybe one day they'll give us an audio track in that S&Q mode, but I think that's like more of an engineering thing that they would just have to change that overall. Here's the deal. I still love this little camera. But again, I love it for what it really is, right? I'm being realistic about what this thing is. To me, it's a glorified video camera. Both this and the FX3, in my opinion. And honestly, you know, one of the reasons why I didn't end up going for the FX6 versus the Komodo is, again, how does a $6,000 camera being touted as a cinema camera doesn't have the ability to do internal RAW? I have a huge problem with this. You say, Justin, what is your issue, man? Just use a monitor, do ProRes RAW. What's the issue? The issue is, as a thank you that you asked, DaVinci Resolve is not compatible with your beloved ProRes RAW. Now, granted, I know this boils down to the reality of the situation of, you know, 2 old white guys having a pissing contest. That's really why we can't have ProRes RAW in DaVinci Resolve, right? But it's a huge disadvantage to all of us loyal customers, right? Because DaVinci Resolve is literally the industry standard for color grading. As much as anyone wants to throw shade at Blackmagic Design, no one will ever say that Resolve is not the king of color grading software, because it is. And if you're not using it, you're doing your work a huge disservice, right? I will say that right off the bat. So the fact that we can't have ProRes RAW in the industry standard of DaVinci Resolve, that to me is why I don't even fuck with it. Quite honestly, right? I don't mess with ProRes RAW. So what do we, okay, we got XAV CSI. Now, before we end this, I do want to give a little bit of credit because they just recently added in a firmware update, DCI 4K at a true 24 frames per second. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to be a little bit more in that cinema line, right? Now this little writing insignia is starting to make a little bit of sense. Okay, I will give them that. But again, that was recently added in a firmware update. And I do want to point out that 6 or 7 years ago, I also had a GH5. That camera also did DCI 4K. Oh, it also had a waveform and it had a vector scope. Okay, but we don't need to go down that road, right? But yeah, I hope you guys can understand what I'm saying, and I hope we can have a peaceful conversation about this. I understand Sony. Maybe I was a little harsh, you know, saying they're not part of our filmmaking. They've obviously risen, right? They have proven themselves with their cameras. We know the Burano now that's out. We know the Venice. We know what the FX9 is capable of. We know. They're doing really cool shit. They've been making the Cine Alta lenses. I love the Cine Alta lens, right? Sony's, look, I'm not saying they don't give back to our community. I'm just saying there's no real legacy there to make me feel like they care about me as a filmmaker, right? And I only say that because I've seen a good number of YouTubers, you know, the whole, Sony versus Canon, right? And I don't give a fuck about that either, right? I don't care what everybody shoots on, and it's crazy to me that everyone cares what I shoot on, because here's the thing with that, right? No one should think the camera makes the image, right? It's the man behind the camera. Dude, you could give Sir Roger Deakins an iPhone 15, he'd go shoot a short film on it, and I can guarantee the price of the new iPhone would fucking skyrocket. The stock would blow up overnight because everybody would be thinking they can have their work look like Sir Roger Deakins just because they're using the same camera he used. It's bullshit, right? It's bullshit. This is why I have a problem with people glorifying the tools. That's really all that is, right? I'm not meaning to throw shade at specific companies, not always anyways, but the reality is I don't understand why we have to glorify these tools. Why I have to, no other industry does that. Think about 2 carpenters, right? If one of them is tired of some shitty old hammer and he trades it out for a different hammer and it's a new brand and he walks onto the job site, there's not a bunch of carpenters snubbing him like, oh man, yelling at him and telling him that they're gonna like walk off the job because he switched his tool. Like, that's insanity. That's the same way I feel about any time people give me shit for changing cameras. I mean, I had a mass exodus of subscribers leave just because I felt obliged to inform you the main reasons why I was no longer using the Sigma FP in my work. And people were up in arms about it. Look, man, I'm here just to inform you. I'm never like like trying to put a needle in your brain and be like, buy this. That's not my intention. You got the wrong guy there, okay? Because first of all, in my opinion, Sigma owes me a paycheck for, you know, making that camera skyrocket. That video is still my #1 video today. It's got over 307,000 views daily. It's my top video, right? So I think they owe me a little paycheck, right? If we wanted to get real with it, right? Now, I'm not saying that they, you know, I'm not trying to be realistic that they owe me money. I could care less. I'm just saying, like, I'm just trying to convey to you guys, like, I don't work for the companies, right? Nobody sponsors this channel. Nobody has ever paid me to make a video. None of that shit. I'm not Gerald and Dunn. I'm not Caleb Pike. I'm not any of those people. I'm not accusing those guys of that. I know they're doing their thing. They're very educated. They're very cool. But at the end of the day, you know, it does seem like certain people are sponsored by certain companies, right? So you have to do your own research on that. You have to suss out your own stuff about that. And you have to remember who I am, right? I'm just a blue collar dude. I'm out here trying to do my thing. I'm a self-made man. When I first moved to LA 11 years ago, I was homeless, right? I built my entire little miniature Dog Times empire all on my own back. I don't even have parents. I'm an orphan. So that's why I was so insanely hurt when someone targeted me and robbed me of $11,000 worth of lighting equipment. So yeah, that happened. If you saw in the community tab, I got robbed. So it really hurt me, right? Because it's like, dude, I'm not like some rich YouTuber kid. I'm not like some trust fund baby. Like none of that shit, man. I'm a self-made man. I'm a working man. And in a time of crisis, which we are in right now here in LA, there's the writer strike and the actor strike. This is the worst I've ever seen this town in terms of jobs. Not only because are the jobs less, but also because people are paying less because they know they can get away with it because they know people are strapped right now. It's brutal out here right now. So to come and target me and steal $11,000 of lighting equipment, you know, it was double locked up. And it was even locked up in a place where I don't usually keep it. So I know I was being watched from afar, somehow, somewhere. And I never put that stuff online. No one knows where I keep my stuff. So they found out where I lived and they started monitoring me, watching me from the street somehow, some way, right? And I only bring that up because it's like, I'm trying to explain to you guys, I'm one of you. I'm one of you. I'm the underdog. That's literally what Dog Times is all about. From the trenches for the trenches. Dog Times doesn't mean I like dogs. Because I kind of don't like dogs. I mean, I like dogs. Obviously, I like dogs. But it's like, I'm not so obsessed with dogs. I'm like, I must name my company after... No. Dog Times is about the mentality of the situation. Dog Day Afternoon, Attica, right? It's more about that rebellious nature of myself. I literally took the title Dog Times from a Charles Bukowski poem, right? So I'm just telling you, I know this is like really going downhill here, but you know, for all of my subscribers, I have to inform them of things that they read on the community tab and all of this and keep everyone up to snuff and hopefully, you know, engage some new people and encourage you to join the party here on the channel. This is what we do. This is what goes on. I try my best to do a little bit of everything. Some people don't like it when I kind of astray to the street photography side. I'm not a street photographer. I just have fun doing it. It's just a hobby of mine. But yes, I am a freelance DP here in LA. And I also work as a gaffer. You know, I've took the time to go back to film school, educate myself about lighting. I take workshops, yada. Okay, we're going to end that there. I hope I didn't piss off too many people. Because look, I still love this camera. I'm going to put out a video on why I do think this is a nice upgrade over the A7S III. And guys, I actually did make money jumping from the A7S III to this. And we'll get into all that in that video. As always, thank you for watching. If you're new here, do what you do. And please check out the Patreon. Now's the time where I need Patreon members. Now's the time I need support because I'm $11,000 less in the hole. Now I have to replace the majority of my lights. It's pretty rough. Or not. I don't want to do that thing either. I don't want to do. I really don't. Like I said, now I'm like going back on this self-made because I am. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm really not. I don't know why I said that about the Patreon. That was a shameless plug on the Patreon. I'll admit that. Okay, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Holding for shitty car. Waiting for shitty car to leave the driveway. Holding for shitty car. Holding. Holding for shitty car. Are they going back inside to get the cat? What the fuck are they doing in the shitty car? Just pull out of the driveway and leave. It's pretty fucking simple. You'll put it in reverse and you leave the premises. Leave the cat behind. Okay, good. No, they're still there. What the fuck are they doing? They're just chilling out. They're like getting high in the driveway. Remember those days? Getting high in the driveway? Walking in. No, Mom, I'm not stoned. What are you talking about? I always eat ice cream this fast at 1 a.m. in the morning. They're just chilling in the car with their loud-ass muffler. I should open up the window. Fix your muffler! I can't do my YouTube video because your muffler's so fucking loud.